I don't know what the government is doing. And this is, again, a question of transparency.
Call logs, permission to modify your storage, prevent the device from sleeping. Are they required for any of the different functionalities this app is supposed to deliver on?
They well may need it, but they're not explaining why they need it. The problem actually is with the government, which has failed to regulate the kind of data which is being gathered from us on our smartphones by these operating systems and smartphone manufacturers.
Hello and welcome to In Focus. I'm G. Sampath. Earlier this week, the Department of Telecommunications ordered smartphone manufacturers to pre-install the Sanchar Saathi app on all new devices. It also told them to ensure that the app's functionalities are not disabled. It said this would protect users from cyber fraud and phone theft. But within 2 days, the government revoked this order. It justified the withdrawal by citing a surge in acceptance of this app. But the revocation was preceded by a tremendous pushback against the original order from digital rights activists as well as the opposition. They said it was an attempt to vastly expand the scope of state surveillance.
So it is a snooping app.
एप्पल की तरफ से हम सबको वार्निंग आई थी कि हमारे फोन पे सर्वेलेंस हो रहा है, वही अब हर आम आदमी के मोबाइल पे होगा.
We need to have a discussion where the government explains what is their thinking.
So how do we contextualize this whole episode? Though it had a positive ending for now, was this an effort to normalize increasingly intrusive forms of surveillance? We speak with Apar Gupta, founder director of Internet Freedom Foundation. Apar, welcome to InFocus. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, Apar, I want to start by asking you a simple question on this issue. Sanchar Saathi has been with us from 2023, May. I think it was initially a portal and then it became an app. So, what was it developed for? What are the problems that it is there to solve? Can you just give us a quick overview?
So, Sanchar Saathi is one of the many ways the government is trying to create digital platforms for any kind of citizen needs. And the need which is being sought to be fulfilled by the Sanchar Saathi website is to check on cyber frauds and cyber security. This includes a wide variety of use cases, which includes blocking and tracing lost or stolen mobile phones, flagging SIM cards which have been fraudulently taken in somebody's name, which also leads to then cyber frauds, disconnecting suspicious connections. For instance, if under your name multiple connections have been taken and you do not recognize one, you can report that. And there are also reporting features. For instance, if you receive a messages which is pretending to be somebody from your bank or from your telecom company or from your electricity provider, when it's not, asking you to click something and can result in losses. So all of this sounds very noble, very nice. And this functionality is there on the website as well as on the app. And as per the figures which the government is putting out by itself, it's been used millions of times. But it's important to remember that these figures are self-reported. They're not audited, and we don't know if there is a success in tackling actual fraud on the basis of the reports which are made on it and the installations also which are done on it, and whether the installations also equal the number of active users or it's just a one-time use many people do, as many people do for many government applications.
Before this conversation, after we fixed it, I just went to the Play Store and I was checking out all the reviews, of Sanchar Saathi, and I saw quite a few reviews right on top where people are saying, I wanted to, report that my phone has been stolen, etc. Now it is asking me to, give the OTP from that SIM which I've lost. This is a very basic thing, isn't it?
Yes, this is a very basic thing, Sampath, and it just goes to show that quite often technocratic methods of tackling a complex social problem are not well thought out. There is a prioritization of speed, scale, and sometimes quite often spectacle, just showing action rather than actually addressing through a conversation by understanding the real problem as it exists. Because if you talk to many people, why people are feeling less safe online, why there is such a huge amount of cyber theft which is ongoing, and whether there may be deeper questions we need to ask ourselves, that there is a need for police reforms, or there is a need to ensure that there's a better cyber security of the data which is being stored of people with banks or with government departments itself, which is being leaked again and again, which is leading to a lot of these frauds. Then those are much more troubling questions to pose, a much more honest conversation to have, which can lead to actual solutions rather than just an app which can magically fix everything, right?
Right. No, coming to this app, which can supposedly fix many things, some people who are experts in this domain, they've been saying that if the idea is to say, let's say, track a stolen phone and block it, you just need two things. One is that IMEI identifier and the network. That is all you need. But this app is asking you for a lot of permissions, call logs, permission to modify your storage, prevent the device from sleeping. All these things are they required for any of the different functionalities this app is supposed to deliver on?
So, Sampath, it may or may not need it as points of data which are required, but the fundamental principle of any good cybersecurity practice, but also just in terms of data protection, is to gather the least amount of information which is needed to fulfill the specified purpose. And the reason for that is that if you gather less information which is needed to do something, and it's just that information when you're responsible for, and then can be exposed potentially if there's any kind of technical mishap which happens. So it makes a lot of sense also from just an operational security perspective to limit the number of data points which are necessary to perform a specific function. So if you want to block a phone, yes, I've also heard this, that all you need is the IMEI of the phone and the network it's connected to. But I don't know what the government is doing. And this is, again, a question of transparency. Sanchar Saathi application itself, the numbers on it are self-reported. We can't peer behind the dashboard. So, Sampath, if people are listening to this podcast right now, and if they go to the Sanchar Saathi application, they'll notice these very impressive figures. But do these figures mean anything? Do these reports mean anything? Where do we get the much more granular data? How many times the application has been updated? What has been the different updates which have been done? A lot of transparency is not present there, which impacts citizen trust. So that's why we are having this conversation. Why are they asking for so many device permissions? They well may need it, but they're not explaining why they need it.
The two very good points you're making here, Apar. One is about, of course, data proportionality in terms of what you seek, whether it is proportional, and the lower is your exposure, the less is the risk. And the other is transparency. Now, speaking of data and numbers, as you said, we can't peer behind the dashboard. But then the government has again trotted out some numbers to even justify the reversal of its order to mandate pre-installation. First, it said this app has to be preloaded into every new mobile which has been manufactured from March 2026, or which is being sold from March 2026. And that is the actual aspect of this entire development, which created a lot of backlash, a lot of public outcry, saying, how can you have a government app preloaded into a mobile phone? Because in that case, you are taking away consent of the user. The consent of the user is one of the foundational principles of digital regulation, privacy, etc. So, you are a lawyer, so I want to also ask you, what is the current law in India when it comes to the state wanting to pre-install an app that it owns or runs in citizens' phones? What does the law say?
The law and the basis of the law emerges from the Constitution. The Constitution recognizes a fundamental right to privacy, and the clearest explanation for that was provided by the Supreme Court when reaffirmed this right and linked it to all the other fundamental rights in 2017 in the Justice Puttaswamy judgment. So in 2017, it says the privacy acts as a limitation on the state on what it can do, which also includes informational privacy. So it requires the state when it does anything that is impacting our privacy, to do it through a law which needs to be passed ideally through parliament. Secondly, that law needs to be for a democratic purpose. This democratic purpose also needs to be met through a manner and form which is proportional, and the least intrusive manner needs to be adopted which impacts our privacy. So you won't slap a curfew on an entire city because there was one reported theft or two reported incidents of violent crime, right? So it needs to be proportional. And this kind of framework which exists for privacy needs to be then reflected as per the Puttaswamy judgment in a data protection law. So the state also has a positive duty, not only what it cannot do, but what it should do to protect our informational privacy. So the data protection law which the government has made is called the Digital Personal Data Protection Act, and it has been notified recently, but it is not in effect because provisions which relate to the consent, which require each time any third party gathers our personal information to seek our consent and specify the purpose for which they are gathering our personal data, will come into effect approximately after 17 months. So essentially what you have today is a constitutional principle which can be enforced through approaching a court in a writ action, for instance, challenging this direction around Sanchar Saathi and saying that the state, firstly, is doing this under the Telecommunications Act and the cybersecurity rules. It has not clearly defined what is an act of cybersecurity. Secondly, it cuts across in a manner which is disproportionate to any incident of cyber fraud or cyber crime by requiring the installation of a government app which is on our smartphone, even if we accept that this app can be removed subsequently. Third, this cuts across the autonomy of a person because the smartphone is essentially private property, and private in the most inner core aspects of a person's daily activity, their personality. It is a meeting point of a financial, personal, personality, intent, and action of every human being. In fact, it knows more about us in many ways, unfortunately, than our family members and friends do, or sometimes we know ourselves, Sampath. So there is a clear basis in law that this directive, which was issued by the ministry, by the Department of Telecommunications, was completely unconstitutional, given the existing law.
But interestingly, it doesn't come under the whatever data protection law, etc. But there is a view that it has bypassed it legally by creating this new entity, which the Department of Telecommunications has done by saying any company which identifies a user through phone by OTP is responsible is accountable to the Department of Telecommunications. So it's not about the internet. So this new telecommunications using entity would expand internet to every kind of telecom operator, a telecom using entity, right? It's not just about digital companies.
The definition of telecommunication service of the Telecommunications Act is so broadly phrased. It includes any signal, any information which passes from a person to another. So earlier you had the Telegraph Act, which the government said was a colonial enactment passed by the British to control our telegraphs. So against our independence fighters, actually it has an interesting history as well, backstory, where it comes after the mutiny or our war of independence by the sepoys. But then you have a Telecommunications Act, which broadly mirrors the same framework but expands government power now to the realm of digital communications. And here, when the act was being debated and there were concerns highlighted not only by civil society activists, but also by technology companies saying that telecommunications regulation needs to regulate telecommunication service providers, ideally telecom companies. But the phrasing of telecommunication services under the Telecommunications Act also includes online web streaming platforms or payment platforms or e-commerce platforms, anything and everything which passes through a digital communication pipe. So at that time, the minister, Mr. Vaishnav, stated, no, this is not our intent. We are not going to enforce it like that. Yet, from what we have seen, this direction which was issued was not only issued to telecom manufacturers or telecom smartphone equipment manufacturers, but a reading of that would also extend to the operating systems which are controlled by both Apple and Google, which is iOS and Android. So it is an exercise of power under the Telecommunications Act and the telecommunications rules, which seems to be very, very expansive, goes beyond our traditional understanding of telecommunication regulation should look at. This is ideally an issue which should be dealt in coordination and be led by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology under the allocation of business rules, according to me.
Right. Thank you for that historical context, Apar. I appreciate that. Now, coming back to the point which spooked many of us, which is that this app would have come pre-installed, and by virtue of being pre-installed, it's like it gets a deeper kind of access to your operating system, the root level access, and by virtue of having that root level access, it can expand its permissions over the air, so to speak, without even asking for any permissions which you've already given. So, what specific dangers does that power generate? In terms of being pre-installed, and people also say that you have so many pre-installed apps which are private apps. So why are you crying when you have a government app, your own government app, which is in your phone OS?
So the first thing I want to just deal with people who say that, oh well, all's hunky dory for people who are happy using Google services and services by Silicon Valley technology providers, or even purchasing Chinese smartphones. I would say that no patriotic or nationalist Indian wants to do that. We use Indian apps as well. Okay. And also, a lot of the intelligentsia and the civil society and the academics and the technologists in India have, in fact, been pushing for this data protection statute, so some level of oversight can be brought on these big tech companies. Have we got that kind of law? No, we have not got that kind of law. Is there a regulatory body which has been set up by that law? No, there's no regulatory body which has been set up by that law. The Data Protection Board can only hear complaints. It can't even set standards. So the problem actually is with the government, which has failed to regulate the kind of data which is being gathered from us on our smartphones by these operating systems and smartphone manufacturers. They have not given us a choice, and that is an issue. But does that mean that just because we don't have a choice with preloaded system apps from private providers who are selling us these devices, that the government makes a bad situation even worse by saying that, hey, let's also try to get our own applications installed? And here people need to consider that the power of the state is very different from the power and incentives of a private manufacturer. The state in India, especially given our rule of law framework, quite often is interested in gathering our personal details for the personal interest of public officials, for the political interest of public officials, in as much as the government needs to know something about the citizens to do its job well, right? And everyone knows this is a fact. We fear the government will gather information about us, and that information will be used against us. This is because there's a lack of adequacy of protection. And what will a private manufacturer or a smart do at the best? It will essentially gather all our data and use it for behavioral advertising or selling our profiles online. The government can do much worse because it has much more power. The second thing which I think which is really important to understand is that when you give an application root level access, it is something such as your phone functionality, your message functionality, an app system functionality, and you cannot remove it. And if the application is Sanchar Saathi and it is updated over the air for existing smartphones, which as per the reporting around this issue, as per industry sources, was the understanding of this direction from the government, that it was not only for new smartphones which was being sold, it was also for existing smartphones. It needed to be integrated with the operating system. What would happen then is that not only you cannot remove it, New functionalities could be added to the Cyber Saathi app under the vague phrasing that the government is wanting to do this to improve your cyber security. In many, many ways, I think this would lead to more and more features being added to the Sanchar Saathi app. These features themselves not being rooted in law, being rooted in a very vague phrasing of what constitutes cyber safety. For instance, what if the app tomorrow requires, and this is a hypothetical, and people may say, I'm scaremongering, but is there any limitation under the law for this? The app may tomorrow require that your perpetual GPS coordinates will be uploaded and will be made available to the government. Will you be comfortable with that? Because they will say that, well, there has been a lot of incidents of chain snatching in a specific area, so we recommend you should switch on the GPS at all points in time as well. Is that something people would be comfortable with?
It's a good question. I mean, you will have a permanent chaperone for all occasions with the state being there. I mean, I often think of the Delhi police slogan, with you, for you, always. I think that is the animating idea behind this app as well. They want to be with you, for you, always. Now, coming to the fact, the latest development, Apar, and the government has sort of reversed its order. But when the order came, it was a notification or an official letter. But the reversal has come through a press release. So can we now assume that this is gone? The danger is over. This is not going to be sort of pushed through the back door or in some other way, or is it still? Do we need to wait for some other legally robust communication from the ministry to assume that okay, now this is not going to happen? There will be no more preloading, no more undeletable apps vis-a-vis this kind of surveillance and Sanchar Saathi thing happening.
So our first demand at Internet Freedom Foundation from the very beginning has been transparency. This cannot be a communication which is only between the Department of Telecom and the private manufacturers of smartphones and operating systems. The initial direction was not made public. After reporting and public outcry, press release was put up on Press Information Bureau. Subsequently, also on the rollback of this direction, there has only been a press release on the Press Information Bureau's website. The modification to the initial direction or an office order or a fresh direction has not been made public. And again, Sampath, I'd like to re-emphasize, this is important because there was so much dispute around the phrasing of paragraph 7b, which mentioned the words modify or remove, right? So we need to look at the black text of the direction to know what is the rollback which has been done and if it has been done completely. Secondly, I think so your question also prompts a wider worry or anxiety that whether the government may bring back such a direction. And here I think that there is a very deep seated surveillance interest by the Indian government, which we have seen through deployments. People may question that whether Aadhaar is a form of surveillance, but it is undeniable that there was no consent which was present in the enrollment of Aadhaar. It was more or less mandatory, even though it was called voluntary. People may look at much more recent deployments such as DigiYatra. Whenever you travel through most airports in India, the first few gates are reserved for DigiYatra, and even sign-ups which were done for it quite often were done without fully informing people that they're being signed on for DigiYatra. So given the wider attitude of the Indian state, which is to collect more data about us, exempt itself from the application of any data protection framework in which it seeks our consent, I would say that all of us need to remain alert and need to push government for higher degree of transparency in its decision making and push for accountability, as we have seen on this Sanchar Saathi app. This is indeed a victory. People need to celebrate it to some extent in times like this. But at the same point in time, this victory should only lead to a sense of optimism that change can happen if people raise their voices. So people need to be alert and they need to be part of the policy making process around technology interventions in our daily lives.
Do you think we need to thank Apple also for straight away saying no on this? Was that a factor as well?
Certainly, we cannot. Very candidly, Sampath, I've seen a lot of civil liberties victories happen when there is a intersection of different interests which come from the private sector, and the private sector is not also a homogeneous block from civil society, which is also not a homogeneous block. So, if you look at the Sharia single judgment, for instance, which struck down 66A, brought in intermediary liability protections, there were petitions both by the People's Union for Civil Liberties, PUCL, as well as the IMAI, the Internet and Mobile Association of India. So this is not to say that industry is left-leaning or civil society is a front for industry. It is to say that when different sections of society are particularly aggrieved by a very drastic government action, their rollback quite often happens. That's just been my learning over years.
Great. So, Apar, we're running out of time. So, one last question. I want to, just take a step back and sort of contextualize within the broader domain of, the politics around data protection and privacy. If you broadly look at the West, Europe, if you look at all their democracies, their data protection, the digital regulatory frameworks are founded on a simple principle, which is consent. It's a foundational principle for any kind of, regulation, be it cybersecurity, be it whatever it is. But then you have other countries like Russia and China, which have successfully pushed through, state-owned apps in the name of national security or whatever it is. And in China, they've done it more in regions where there is some kind of extremism, etc. There is a security threat. But India, we say we are the world's largest democracy, but our if this Sanchar Saathi move, which has been reversed, if this is anything to go by, do you see that India is moving more in the direction of authoritarian regimes when it comes to matters of privacy and consent, or are we? Is that reading too much?
This is not at all reading too much. For years, I have been stating that uh, the digital uh, the digital transformation of our society is changing our relationship as Indian citizens with the state, and the power which was quite often there in the Indian state, which was through formal mechanisms, institutions of the state, is now being done through technology. Quite often, this results in a less amount of transparency, a less amount of uh, our ability to peer into how the state is doing things which impact us in our daily lives. And this is a form of authoritarianism. Website blockings exist, which exist without any kind of transparency. Internet is shut down. Spyware applications such as Pegasus are used against journalists, opposition leaders, even constitutional functionaries. So India quite often is looking at using technology to cement state control, executive power, and I have been writing about it for a long time. Some of the recent instances I just like to remind people include, for instance, a coercive application and adoption of digital platforms beyond Sanchar Saathi. For instance, there's SIM binding, which is being done now. There is also, under the Data Protection Act, a specific
Can you talk a little bit about SIM binding? I was wondering if I should ask you about that. So SIM binding, how does that really affect the user in terms of all these issues we've been speaking about, privacy, surveillance, etc.? I mean, what is it exactly, and what does it do?
So SIM binding is basically the Department of Telecom saying that if you are having Telegram or WhatsApp on your phone,
What
Telegram
about
and
Signal?
WhatsApp, yeah, I don't know technically if that it will apply to it in the same way. I'm a lawyer at the end of the day, but if you look at Telegram and you look at WhatsApp, they both also run on your laptop, and a lot of people text through their laptop, especially people who are a little older, right? So the Department of Telecom is now wanting us to only use WhatsApp and Telegram on a device which is linked to the mobile number, binding the SIM to a service which is authenticated from that SIM to be used. Okay. And according to this checks on fraud, because for what happens according to the Department of Telecom is that a person may be using a WhatsApp account in one smartphone but has authorized a laptop or another tablet which is running WhatsApp without that person's authorization. So the Department of Telecom is wanting us every 6 to 8 hours to re-authenticate ourselves when we are using WhatsApp web or Telegram as an application on our laptop. This is, according to it, again, something where it's doing to check on cyber fraud, but this will again result in a very high amount of inconvenience, disruption for people who type on WhatsApp, because it essentially means you need to log in twice every day, at least, right? If you're using your laptop at different points for over a period of 12 hours. So it's just regulation and directions which are being issued without an adequate amount of thought, which violates all of our autonomy and it's and also day-to-day convenience. Sampath, on the SIM binding issue, there has been adequate criticism which is also coming in that it will result in a huge amount of impact not only on individual users but also startups, etc., which rely on an authentication to be done once, because it and then be, of course, you can ask for that authentication to be refreshed over a period of time, let's say after a week, or if somebody's connecting from a network in another country, or there has been a change in the behavioral pattern of views, etc., you can do that. But this kind of hard regulation and intervention just makes everyone's lives tougher.
Right. Thank you for that, Apar. I think the larger context here, you have summed it up really well. I think people need to think about this, which, as I understand it, is that as we look at digital transformation in India, with Digital India and Aadhaar and various apps and so on, I think that the fundamental trend is, as you rightly pointed out, the changing relationship of the citizens with the state. I think the citizen-state relationship is mutating into more of a ruler-subject kind of a dynamic, where there is instructions and orders coming, from one direction to the other, but hardly any kind of a feedback loop. But in this case, apparently that feedback did work, and the Sanchar Saathi app order to sort of have it pre-installed has been reversed. And I think, as you said, we should celebrate that moment, but we should continue to be vigilant as well. Thank you so much once again for joining us, Apar. Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much, Sampath. Thank you to all the listeners of the Hindu podcast. I always enjoy these conversations.